so that we can get quickly into the subject, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our presenter today, Chandra Robinson from Lever Architects, on Albina One, the first building constructed in the redevelopment of the Albina neighborhood. Take it away, please, Chandra. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here to share with you a little bit about Albina One. You may know lots of it already. I'm going to provide you some context because the project is really important in the context of, the world right now and all the things that are happening in Portland. So it may seem like it meanders off to things, but they're all really critical to me as part of this work. So I'll talk a little bit about Lever and our work in Albina, a little bit about history and all the master plans we have in the city, all the things that are happening around Albina, and then I'll share some things about the building itself. So these are all the folks who are part of the core team that worked on Albina One. Not all of them still work at Lever. And I put everyone here because everyone has a different role and sort of contributes to the project in a different way. And I feel like it's important to recognize all those folks, people who were, project architects or project managers and then switched out with someone else or came on and off the project. But this is the overall team. Thomas is the founder of Lever. Doug is our design director. I'm a principal. Other folks are project managers and project architects, but I appreciate all the work that they have done. Lever does have a lot of projects in Oregon. This specifically is mass timber projects, but what you can see is, this is sort of the Albina area. And we have the Meyer Memorial Trust, which was completed in 2020, and they are part of the sort of revitalization, redevelopment, reinvestment into Albina. They used to be in the Pearl District. They wanted to be located in places where they actually give grants, so they moved themselves over here. We have a couple of libraries, the Albina Library and the North Portland Library. Our office is in Albina. And then these are kind of a few projects that are surrounding, but we do have several projects right in Albina and our office is there. We're in a pretty interesting time in Portland right now in terms of development. While it doesn't seem like there's a lot of money for development, we have a lot of central city master plans that have a lot of big ideas of what can happen. And you can see, the location of all of these things. If all of the development were to happen in those places, Portland would look very different than it does now. You could imagine sort of downtown high rises being on both sides of the river, and just the landscape of, what we see every day could change a lot. And I think that's really exciting because, I went to grad school in Boston at the Boston Architectural Center, and all of that time up to grad school, I really couldn't live in Portland again because it felt exactly the same as it did when I was in high school because I grew up there. And, in high school, taking the bus downtown and hanging out at Powell's, drinking coffee and then wandering around. And it felt like that's what there was to do in Portland every time I came home to visit. So we got the Pearl, we got a lot of other development happening. And, after grad school, I was like, okay, I can live here again. I can, station myself here because Portland is amazing and I wanted to live here. I just didn't feel like it had enough going on. And if you look at it now, it's kind of crazy, right? So I've been on the Portland Design Commission for the last 6 years. I have a couple more years to go. I'm the chair of the Design Commission right now. So I have seen all of these plans, master plans. Lloyd Center doesn't quite have one yet. The Albina Road Alliance isn't actually a master plan. 1803 Fund doesn't have a master plan yet, but these are all places that will have a plan that encompasses sort of a lot of acreage. And you can see in our Albina area how much is actually happening. I start here because, we're in a time where the things that are happening in Albina are really relevant to what's happening all across the country, right? The way that we've been able to support one another is through protests, through activism, and through community support. So similar to the Black Panthers, they started a free school kids lunch program. This is Kent Ford. He still lives in Portland and gives tours. And that's what we're doing now, right? We're protesting, we're providing food to community members, and it's one of the ways that we can actually make a big impact when, the current administration is pulling back on support of programs like this. Portland is able to push back on that. And I think that's really valuable for us. So that's where we're going to start with context. And now going back in time a little bit. And a lot of these things I'll say, if you don't know about them, you should know about them, look them up. I'm not going to give you a full history of all of this that's here, but some tidbits that you may or may not know. So one thing, back in the day in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there were things called Green Book. And those were sort of like the yellow pages for places that Black folks were welcome. So if you were traveling across the country or state to state, you would look at the Green Book and say, okay, there's a diner in this town that people won't be mean to us. They won't kick us out. They won't make us leave. Or here's a hotel that we can stay in, right? So these books had to be published across the country so that people knew where they could go and be safe. In Albina, that's important because the Paramount Apartments were the Paramount Hotel at one time, and that's a place where Black folks traveling to Portland could actually stay. You couldn't stay anywhere, but you could stay there. So, for instance, when musicians would come to town, Thelonious Monk, lots of famous musicians came through. They would stay with friends that they knew, or they would stay at the Paramount Hotel because they were allowed to. So that's really important history for all of America. There are a few really big things in recent history that impacted the Black community. One was the Vanport flood in 48. It was a place where people had brought in to work, immigrants, people of color. When it was flooded out, they were pushed out of that area. And then we started this sort of lengthy legacy of urban renewal, which they would say that, these areas were blighted. And the only thing that was wrong with them was that they had people of color in them, right? So they deemed those areas less valuable. There's a lot of great resources through the Oregon Historical Society. This one's an, Oregon History Project. So it talks about people's protest about their homes and their land being taken for through eminent domain for the betterment of the community. So the Emmanuel Hospital, there was essentially a Black Main Street that was raised in 1970 to 1972, again, because they said it was blighted and because the hospital needed to expand. Well, two of those blocks have never been built on. One's just grass and the other one's a parking lot. And so, 60 years later, they never expanded, right? So these are important things to remember through history. Those are being built on now. There's a Williams and Russell project that's taking one of those lots and building a lot of great things on it. But it obviously didn't need to expand, right? They were using that as an excuse to move folks around. So this is an Albina Vision Trust diagram you've probably seen a lot of times, but it really shows you, these were all single family homes. Generational wealth was being built. It was taken away for construction of I-5, the Memorial Coliseum, and now you can see this whole area, right? This is the Portland Public Schools building up here. This is where Albina One is. And so Albina Rose Alliance is looking at this area, like redeveloping in here and making it, feel like a community again to connect back with what AVT is doing. And then the 1803 fund has purchased land here and here to do the same thing. So it's pretty interesting to be in Portland right now because there are a lot of different groups who are actually contributing to this redevelopment. So if you even just look up Oregon Historical Society Black Collection, they have a lot of great resources that talk about the history in the city. So where we are now is in rebuilding. That was taken away. That was then. Now there's a lot of reinvestment that's happening, which is pretty exciting. So one of those groups obviously is Albina Vision Trust. These are all sort of images that you will have seen, and they have a 50-year plan to redevelop all of this area, right? And area over here is what 1803 is taking on, so just outside of their 94-acre master plan. And then Albina Rose Alliance, so AVT in conjunction with the Portland Trailblazers, is kind of looking at this area and here where they have structured parking and just see what they can do to kind of make that a more civic space. The project we're going to talk about today is Albina One. It's right here. Meyer Memorial Trust is just right across the freeway. It's actually right there. And then here is the Left Bank building, which used to have jazz club in it. And so it was a place a lot of musicians came into town to play. And then this is the Paramount Hotel. which is the Paramount Apartments. It's affordable housing, and that's where folks were allowed to stay. And what's really cool is that after we built Albina One, AVT came back and bought the Paramount. They brought the community who lived in the Paramount over to the new building and said, you know, we're going to have a lot of programs. You are welcome here. We built this park right in the middle. That is a space for you to be. So instead of, you know, building something big and kind of blocking them out, we created a really wide, generous sort of park in the middle that can be shared. And this is how you begin to create a new neighborhood, right? There was one apartment building here. What's the a great way is to start with another apartment building and create a space for more people. But, you know, there's not a grocery store here. They're not the things that you normally need in your neighborhood. So now that they're going to buy Portland Public Schools land, they're going to have a lot of opportunity to actually build the neighborhood. But the idea is we're here on the high point, right? We can see kind of all of the rest of the development that's happening. And you can see across the river to all of those beautiful views. So these are, again, their images, some early ideas in their community investment plan about, what's needed in the area to make a great place. How do we remake this space? Yes, obviously, we're not taking down the Coliseum or the Moda Center, but we have the opportunity to really build around those things and create a space that feels more like it's for pedestrians and people than it currently does now. 1803 fund, like I said, Albina One is right here in blue, the Moda Center, the Memorial Coliseum, and then these are some, new images that 1803 put out. So this is a land that they're going to buy or have bought and do a few things in there, including the grain silos. And so they've got a lot of vision for a lot of things happening. Albina Rose Alliance is between ABT and the Blazers, again, working to create new kinds of spaces and improve places for everyone, right? Not just people of color, but focusing on creating places for people of color to come back. So, Albina One, it's affordable housing. It has 94 units. It's a weirdly shaped site. And at one point during I'm going to go back a little bit just to show you a map again. At one point during the development, so this is the Paramount right here, this little corner, and then this is Albina One, and this is the park between it. But you'll see that there's a street right here. This is Dixon that comes right into it. That's a street that exists right now. And in covering I-5, the idea was to extend Dixon all the way across and then connect back to sort of Upper Albina, right? So the idea of the freeway cover is to be able to reconnect that community and make it contiguous. And it's supposed to be built so that smaller buildings can go on top of it, right? Like the big dig they did in Boston, doesn't have capacity for actual buildings. It has a few like structures, it has like sort of park equipment and trees and things like that, but not structures, not big building structures. So these I think are supposed to have maybe 3-story buildings, 5-story buildings, not tall, but buildings nonetheless. So originally this street was going to cut right through the site and split it into two. And we did a couple of studies on it, and we were like, there's really no way that you can build apartments on either one of these parcels if the street goes through. So Albina Vision Trust worked with PBOT and worked with ODOT to say, this future street for ODOT going across the freeway wasn't going to be aligned that way. And for PBOT for them to say, yes, it's okay if this street, which is ours in Portland, doesn't cross over. And so they had to work with both of them, but they were successful so that we could get a contiguous piece of land. So again, affordable apartments, some things that came out of the community investment plan that we wanted to sort of put into the building were, a desire for open space that people could feel safe in, a desire for the $1 million views, not to have sort of the worst sites or the worst views because they were kind of buried in something, but to be able to have the opportunity to have these great views. And so there's balconies on the backside, which kind of look out over the river. They look out to Forest Park. You get great sunsets. You can see the fireworks on the 4th of July from there. Really beautiful. In terms of the exterior design, some of the things that we were doing were, kind of late in the process. Albina Vision Trust asked us to do something with Afrofuturism. And so I was like, well, that sounds really cool. I wish I would have been thinking about this from the beginning, but like, let's figure out what can we do? What can we do? Right. And so before that, this was the expression of the building. So it really just had, gold, all this gold panel on the ground floor, and then gold panels of all of the windows. And we said, well, that's pretty boring, not Afrofuturism. We started to think of different things by working with some artists and find some opportunities for murals that could represent Afrofuturism, because the building was designed, right? So what was going to happen was an exterior expression that was kind of over the entire facade in order to make something like that happen. So, and here you can see the Paramount Hotel apartments, and this is the big park that's right between them. So you're not blocking any light or views from that, but you're actually providing another amenity. This is Wheeler Street, which is like maybe 15, 20 feet lower than Flint Street up top here. So the building has a lot of grade to kind of manage. So working with artists, which was Cleo Davis and Kayeen Talton Davis, and they are, I think they're sort of cultural artists, cultural ambassadors. They do a lot of different things in the community to sort of preserve and teach people about history. They've taught a studio as part of the spatial justice program at the University of Oregon. And they came up with some different designs that they really liked. And these were all kind of based on the idea of sort of plants growing up, which is sort of an Art Deco style. I mean, many of these are Art Deco style, but these designs that they had taken from sort of other work that they had done and said, and then they put them all over in places on the building and said, like, what of these could possibly work? Here are some ideas that we really like. So we kind of looked at all of them and tried out a few things, but we really kind of gravitated to this design right here, the one that's a little bit Art Deco, because it felt like a nice contrast with the rest of the building because it was really soft and the rest of the building is very angular. So we took that and started to work with what could be on the exterior. And, the exterior is stucco. So I was kind of like, well, how can we possibly do this on stucco without it just being a painting, being a mural? Because of the texture of stucco, you can't really get crisp lines, right? It's not flat. It had a texture to it. So I looked at several different ways of doing it, thinking about using sort of trim pieces like Fry Reglet, because they can do arched pieces. I thought about looking at sort of the handcrafting sgraffito, using tools or freehand kind of getting designs on this, but the scale of the building is big, and there aren't a lot of craftspeople who actually do this work, and we don't have craftspeople that do this work on this scale of a building. Something smaller, yes. Other ways that you see them do things in McMansions, right, is using foam profiles and stuccoing over that. And that was just it was not gonna wear well, and it seemed terrible to put foam on the building. I was really invested in making this work, but because we had a specific proprietary system, a drive-it system, they would not warranty the facade if we put any additional sort of reveals or joints in the paneling. So we weren't able to do that. So we're like, well, what are we going to do? It can't be flat. It can't be a painting. It needs to be expressive and joyful and on a really big scale. And so what we decided was to work with the stucco team and come up with a stencil. And stucco has these 3 layers. So on the second layer, apply the stencil and then put the finish coat of stucco on top of it and then peel the stencil back. And so what that left you, as you can kind of see it in here, is a very small bit of relief. So 1/8 of an inch difference. Not big. Would have been real cool if I could have got 1/2 an inch or something like that, right? But trying to figure out how to then do this to a building that's already designed and we already have a system going. And you can see we tried the painting, like, okay, well, maybe if we have some depth and then we try to paint inside of that, it'll feel like it is deeper. We might get a cool shadow line or something. But when we looked at painting within the stencil line, it just flattened it out as if there was no stencil at all. It might as well have just been painted on. It didn't have a very good effect. But if you see here doing blue on blue and not painting, because all of the layers, the top two layers were blue, right? So the second layer was blue, the scratch coat. And in looking at this, I was like, actually, and we actually tried a darker color as well, dark blue and black. I was like, well, you do see a little bit of relief there, and it's actually more like embossing without any color. So you see just a subtle sort of print on the building as if it's embossed. And so this is kind of where we ended up going. So the embossing, I looked back at any kind of precedent that I could think of in art that was really like color on color, where you weren't necessarily seeing sort of all of these printed things, right? So it was really about a difference in sheen or a little bit of a difference in hue. And this is about, the actual reveal, or how you fill reveals in with gold, which obviously that would have been amazing, but that wasn't going to happen, but it's a cool idea. This image is one that we used in the building. We were thinking of what are the ways that we can kind of represent this idea of Afrofuturism, which is about prosperity in the future, about representing Black folks in the future. The idea of, white supremacy and all the things that are happening now is to eradicate anyone who is not European, right? So the idea of Afrofuturism is saying that Black spaces exist in the future, and we are part of all these possible future stories. And so sometimes they're spacey, sometimes they're not, but it really can encompass so many different things. And this image, which is a photo and a painting, we thought was a great representation of that, right? It shows sort of royalty, prosperity, and sort of abundance and things happening in the future that are kind of connected to the past. So this was really our inspiration, our color palette, and using gold. But we were kind of going into this, right? This color on color, in order to get something happening on the exterior building. So here's where we chose a dark blue, right? And then a lighter blue. And what we ended up doing was just using the same blue that we were using on the layers anyway, and just using the stencil to create a difference in the texture. So the stencil actually made it smooth where everywhere else was textured, and that's why you can read it, right? So texture difference, just like a sheen difference would work, or very slight difference in the colors would also do that. So here's really just, the idea of it. We're just removing one area of one layer. And then thinking about how this happens, so that there's enough material left behind that it doesn't impact the wearability of the stucco. And we added these perforated screens, which then had that same kind of motif in it. And it's really about people and plants kind of growing up into the sky and growing into the future, really abstracted, and looks very Art Deco. And I did a lot of research on different motifs and kind of what the artist told me, but also how else they had been represented. And I found a really cool article in the New York Times about Afro Deco, and how all of these like really common motifs and ways, like stylized ways of representing them, were taken from Yoruba furniture, right? African furniture. And so those original artists had been inspired by that. And so I've started calling it Afro Deco when it's made by a Black artist, and kind of has the intentionality of representing things within sort of the African diaspora. So here are the balconies. They're shared balconies so that more people can gather on them, and it creates a higher ceiling in them so they don't feel so small, because these feel giant and generous, and you can see really far. So these are those $1 million views that everyone gets to share, so that if your apartment is kind of on the inside and maybe facing north, you still have a balcony to come to and kind of connect with people and see the fireworks. We did some test print patterns of perforating chipboard, just printing on paper, the different, hole pattern and spacing and size. And then the lined thickness, this is on Albina Yard, our building. So printed out a big piece to see what that would read like from far away. And so 2 inches seemed too fat, and 1.5 was nice and delicate. And again, looking at different size holes and what it would do to the patterns. And here's a few iterations of those and what kind of looked cleaner, because you'll see those lines in there as opposed to this, where the shape is made by the dots, which maybe are too big. And so it's not as clean a read. And now I will share actual photos of the project with you. So I know it took a while to get there. So this is the Flint entry. This is where residents come in. All of the branding was done by Kayeen Talton Davis, who works for Albina Vision Trust. So the font and the color palette and the wayfinding and all of that was done by her, as well as this design on the exterior of the building. So she gave us a basic design. We resized it, redistributed it, and kind of made it work with the facade. But the original shapes were what came from her. And so you can just see those just barely on there. Again, just like embossing, a little bit of a print of a pattern. Those are those balconies with lighting. So some folks have these great views already, but on the backside, other folks don't have views. This space down here is intended as a separate space. It doesn't connect to anything interior to the building. And so at one time, it was going to be a coffee shop run by high school students or another youth program, a maker space, those kinds of things, but something that's separate. And the feel of the street isn't great right now on Wheeler because it kind of goes down and around the backside of the PPS building. But the idea is this building is facing all the rest of the Albina Vision Trust community investment plan, right? It's at the top and it will be able to see all of that work that's starting to happen in the future. And so it's a great place to connect with other people who are already there at the Paramount building. This is at Flint Street, this is the top of the ramp that takes you down to the main plaza. And it's privately owned, obviously, but it is publicly accessible. So there's a ramp, there's stairs, and then there's a bike ramp thing for your wheel to get you down here. So a lot of folks go back and forth between here. This is from the big plaza. So you'll see that ramp in the background. This big plaza is where they held the grand opening. So there was a stage here and a band. And then all of this seating and a tent in the back for people coming to watch the grand opening. And it was amazing to see it full of people because it's exactly what it was designed for. And it looked great and people fit and they were able to get all the things in there that they were hoping to get in there. So this is that big space. Here's where the band was. This big entry is the community entry because this ground floor has all the upper floors are units and then the resident lobby and the project manager office. Down here, there's a really big community room. There's an office here for POIC, who runs a lot of programs that are, job trainings, parenting. They collaborate with Rosemary Anderson High School. And so they have high school students. And so they have offices here and they actually run resident programs for everyone. So this space, as you walk through, has a kitchen that's shared, has bathrooms, has other meeting rooms, and then it goes out into an interior courtyard. So big courtyard for adults and kids, and then a little courtyard that's very protected in the back for maybe smaller kids who you can see from the laundry room in case you're down there doing laundry. So again, a little bit close up of the stencil on the stucco. Main entries. Going back into this main lobby, and you'll see this light sculpture a little bit closer later. This is the resident lobby on the upper floor, so you can see the metal screens. You walk between the metal screens in the building as the stairs that kind of take you down. This sculpture was done by Cleo Davis and Robert Clark, and they are Black Aesthetic Studio. They are an architecture firm here and in California. Robert's in California, but they designed this, had it fabricated, had it UL listed. So they had a certifier come out and look at it while it was in the shop, so they could actually make this and sell this as a light if they wanted to other places, which I thought was really amazing. But you can see it has some of those same motifs and shapes in the veil that surrounds it, and does a lot of crazy light stuff. There's sort of a glass bulb on the inside. So here, by putting in art, this is kind of where the Afrofuturism came back in, right? Besides sort of the palette on the interior of all of um, the furniture and the carpets and things which you can kind of see in here. And these were either BIPOC designed furniture, or the textile we chose for the furniture was BIPOC designed. So here's a kitchen where everyone can come down and hang out. This is the kind of back patio where there's a little courtyard for the little kids, right? So it's all fenced in, and it's also on the shady side of the building. So in the summer, it's nice and cool over there compared to the other side. But this is kind of the protected courtyard where you can have littler kids play and not worry that they're kind of accessible by the public. So this is that kitchen, and POIC, has coffee set out, and they do a lot of events where they have food and have people come and just hang out in here. There's some beautiful textiles down on the wall. Down here is where you kind of get to like mechanical rooms. And then in here is the big community room. So these are actually all the folks from the Paramount building across the park when they came in and were being, they were just sharing with them what Albina Vision Trust is and kind of what their plans were for the area, and the fact that they were buying the building. It was still going to be affordable. No one was going to be asked to move. They were going to be doing some upgrades on the building, and they would have events that they would invite them over for in here. So again, really intentional about creating community, building where people already were so that it felt less lonely as the building starts to fill up. They weren't all by themselves there. But it represents a really big change in that area, adding a residential building when there has only been one, for 50 years. And then the apartments themselves. So if you have an apartment on the sort of west side, you get those $1 million views. You're looking out at the Pearl and at the West Hills and the sunsets, and they're really beautiful. I think the most important thing in terms of affordable housing is making something that looks market rate, make something that people feel really proud to come home to, that little kids, want to invite their friends over after school because they have a playground and they have a nice home and they want to share that. And they want people to come over and spend time with them. I think that's kind of the best thing that you can do in terms of affordable housing. And it absolutely is all of the things that Albina Vision Trust asked for: place for people to root themselves, to start to take up space, knowing that this whole area in front of them that they could see was going to gradually change, right? And gradually turn into something that was really welcoming. And in terms of urban design, was going to be different than other places that we've seen in Portland. And so I think that's really the big takeaway for me, is that this was an important project because it was the first one. It set up a nice place where AVT can come back in that plaza and have events to talk about the things that they're doing. They have a place where they can land that is theirs and that can fit a lot of people, that can grow and can shrink. And from that place, it's a perfect vantage point to the rest of the development. And they're really excited about it. Yeah, they really love it. So that's all I have for you, but happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Chandra. I've never heard that presentation, so it's incredible to hear the history and just like the evolution of the site. So thanks for walking us through that. It's great to have so many people here, and some questions are rolling in, and I can field some of those for the group. David is wondering, did the design take environmental issues like sound and air quality into account? And if so, how did that impact the budget?
Yeah, so the apartments that are all facing I-5 actually are triple glazed because we didn't want there to be so much sound coming in from that side compared to the other sides. And, the Meyer Memorial Trust building, we didn't actually have to do that. They were all just regular IGUs with like argon. But you can tell you close the window because it's a high quality window. You close the window, you hear virtually nothing. You open it and it's quite loud. And so we did do that intentionally, knowing that that was the louder side, and you have no idea when the freeway is actually going to get capped, and so you can't really count on that even for the life of the building, honestly. And people live in affordable housing. I think I heard from Home Forward that the average was 7 years, but like I lived in affordable housing, until I left for college, and so people grow up in these apartments, right? They are there forever. Parents have kids, the kids grow up and move out. And so it's really important to create things that provide good indoor air quality and good light and good acoustic separation. So we did do that, but because we only did it on one side, it wasn't a huge impact. And then, current code requires that you have ventilation, fresh air coming into your units, right? That wasn't a requirement before. But it is now. And so we have great ventilation, and that's because kids get asthma when they grow up in homes that don't have great ventilation, right? So they have those. We have mini splits for all of the units individually. So they have heating and cooling. Again, not something you always used to get in affordable housing. But as Oregon has gotten hotter and hotter, when I was a kid, there was maybe one day a year where you were like, oh man, why don't we have air conditioning? But basically you were fine, right? And now that's different. It's more like a week at a time and maybe 4 weeks total where you're like, it is way too freaking hot. So having air conditioning is really important, and not just air conditioned hallways and spaces where people just open their door and kind of get some of the AC from there, but individual. So and having the ERVs, having the ventilation, those were definitely a cost add, but they were required. So it wasn't really something that was an extra cost to the building.
That's great. And where could we direct people for information on affordability and AMI, etc.?
I did the numbers for some folks who came out from Prosper Portland. They asked about some numbers and I put it together for them. So if you want it, I'll put it together, and then maybe Annie, you can just share it with folks, because I don't think that it exists already on the Albina Vision Trust website. But there is an Albina One property manager. And so if you were looking to rent there, they have all of the numbers. And so maybe I could just reach out to them and get something and then point you there.
That's great.
Because there should be a rental website. I just don't know what it is.
Okay. This is fun. Do you have some insights into that you can share in how to approach design for an affordable housing project, so that, beauty and making meaningful open spaces, all that is kind of considered, because, budget is an issue. So could you impart any tips and tricks?
Yeah, so I've only worked on two housing projects. I hadn't done housing before, and so I did Deacon Court, which is 187 units for Home Forward, and then Albina One. And so 2025 Deacon Court, had a grand opening like in February, and then Albina One in September. And so these are all kind of from one time, right? It's not like over my career, I've had different experiences with these. So the things that we're doing now, I mean, the number one thing that that actually helps that we haven't done, actually, there's a third one happening now, but that we haven't done until this third one is, simplifying the floor plan. If you look at any of our projects, Albina One is kind of like a crooked C. It's not round, it's angles, but it means that there are a lot of units that have some really cool angles, which I love because they come to like really tight points, and it's just an interesting kind of space where your closet is like a triangle. Of course, not everybody loves that, but number one is that if you make things as efficient as possible. That reduces cost, right? In your foundation and also kind of where you're plumbing, and you can put chases in areas that actually serve a lot of units instead of having a lot of things broken up because your building shape is so different. And so that's kind of the number one thing that that we're always told really helps, and we just don't always do it. But we do obviously do all the other things for efficiency, getting your plumbing back to back. But I think the really important one is not choosing very many different materials for things. Just choose something that looks good and don't try to make every room kind of its own thing. One thing we started doing is having, we did it in Decum and in some ones that are coming up in the future, but there's like a color to the casework on the bottom, and then the top is white. And rooms are already pre-painted with a color because everything usually comes white and comes, like wood colored laminate or gray or something like that. But, when you live in an apartment, if you paint, you have to repaint before you leave, or sometimes you're just not allowed to paint. And so it doesn't allow you to kind of personalize your space in the way that you might want to. So we've started just painting for people. Um, and that doesn't save costs, but it does help in terms of maintenance over time. You just have one accent color. People are painting their apartments less. You don't have to repaint them. Um, Other things we do, we try to pick, reasonably priced fixtures and use the same fixture everywhere, right? Um, and that's hard to do because lighting is expensive. I think the client has to understand where you're going and that you're going to spend money on your mechanical because Oregon code, requires that you do that. What we did in Albina One is the roof has solar. So we have all the park and all our green space and essentially our green roof requirements, but all on the ground floor where people can actually enjoy them instead of up on top. And so we just have all solar on the top, and the solar is actually paying for the building and then resident unit energy costs. So it pays for, the lights in the hallway and things like that, but then goes to the resident. So that actually makes the resident costs cheaper. But if they weren't doing that, then it would make building operations cheaper. We did stucco because it was more affordable than anything else. We're in the Lloyd district, even though it seems like we're far away from Lloyd. But in the Lloyd district, there's a really strong horizontal kind of black and white contrast sort of theme going through, and there's not a lot of brick, right? It just buildings from a different era. And so the idea is that when you're building in Lloyd, you're trying to be compatible, resonate a little bit with the context, fit into the context. And so we had to do that same thing. So we couldn't use brick because even though the Paramount apartments across from us were brick, there's not that much brick in Lloyd in general, right? And they wanted to kind of like, this is the evolution of the context, right? It's grown up. There's a few brick buildings left, but not that much. We're next to, the Moda Center, the Memorial Coliseum. Like those are all, much more modern buildings. And so we could have done metal panel, and we decided to do stucco because that seemed like it was going to be the least costly. Even though it's so labor intensive, I don't really understand why it's less costly than something like metal panel. And then as you go along the project, like the prices just constantly change, right? So if you ask somebody to reprice, you're like, oh, now brick is less expensive than this. And it's kind of crazy. But we chose stucco because it was cost effective. And we chose the, through color, blue and blue. So that they wouldn't have as much maintenance to do. So there wasn't like a different color underneath that would chip off and they would have to repaint or anything like that. So that was the way that we saved money, was in our facade selection, and then in simplifying the fixtures and the materials that we use on the interior.
That makes sense. I appreciate so much the exploration you all went into to find even the littlest bit of relief, even on the stucco,
Yeah.
because that makes a difference. That starts to speak about materiality and craft, and so just diving into the layers and what can you do with these layers that are relatively thin, but to get that reading on a global scale, I think it was really cool to see. And also, I think that that relief um, is always, it's hard to get any kind of relief, even facade or even like building massing relief on affordable projects and ones with like really tight budgets. But I do appreciate on the ground level that covered kind of public walkway behind the screens, and what a cool urban space, that is.
Yeah, we did spend money there, right? Ground
Yeah.
floor, gold metal panel, perforated panels, that kind of thing, to make the pedestrian experience something different and nice, and also to pull the stucco up because it's easier to damage than a metal panel is, right? So to try not to have too many places where the stucco comes to the ground was also useful in terms of maintenance.
Yeah. Were there any urban design advocates other than the design team that was pushing like these big urban moves at like the park and the covered kind of walkway on the ground level? Like was PBOT or ODOT involved or
No,
active in this?
no, it was really the design team based on what was in the community investment plan. We didn't have to do our own community engagement for it because Albina Vision Trust had taken 2 years to do it, and they had some really great diagrams and lists of things where we understood what people were looking for, what experiences they wanted to have, right? And so creating this big park was one, a way to respect the history of Albina and the Paramount Apartments, and that's an important building, right? It hadn't been important until people noticed and knew what it was, and then decided to take care of it. And so to create that buffer and to create community, so more people is better than like slowly trickling in one family at a time moving into a building, right? So that was important. The site has such a huge grade change that if we didn't have the park, right? So there wasn't a place where you could go, you could cross that grade change without going through the building, then you would have to go around, or you'd have to come into the building via like some sort of back door and up some stairs, elevator, which would mean that you'd then have to have like property management or someone visible on both sides to enter, because Wheeler does this and Flint does that, right? So it was economical in a way to not duplicate spaces, and then increase the amount of management that was required just to watch the building. And so creating that public space was important. But having outdoor space for kids, like in the front plaza, the main plaza, there's a misting pole in there because, like I said, summers are getting super hot, and we thought that would be a cool place to be able to have kids come and grandmas sit around and then, get misted. When it's windy, though, we tried it out and the mist kind of blows away because the mist is like too misty, like the droplets need to be bigger in order to like sort of rain on you. So like a rain pole is probably better than a misting pole, but it wasn't it wasn't about that specific urban intervention, except that in thinking about the cover for the highway and then all the other stuff happening, right? This is that one spot, the first spot that's going to touch both of those. And so to have a place where people could stand on the top of Flint and then look out, because you're seeing between two buildings, you're seeing down a street. So you'll have the opportunity to see development as it comes, as long as Dixon remains a street, right? So it was a really good place for the community, for Albina Vision Trust to be able to visualize all the other things that were happening. You can imagine if there wasn't a way to do that, you would just come out onto a balcony and then be able to look, but like no one who lives in the building, who doesn't live in the building would be able to experience that. And so while we were only thinking about the community who was moving in and the future things they were doing, that big move was really important because then it connects Upper Albina and all of the new Lower Albina, as long as that is maintained. But PBOT and ODOT were really about the roads. They were about we did a DAR with the Design Commission. So because it's affordable housing, we didn't have to go through the full type 3 and do an actual hearing. So we did a DAR and then had a staff level review of it. And so those are all the things that Design Commission looks at. They look at public realm and context and quality and permanence. And so public realm really specifically is, do you have places where as a pedestrian you can walk and not be poured on in the rain? Do you have places that feel safe and open? Do you have greenery? All of these things are important in terms of the design guidelines for the city. And so the things that PBOT asks or the Design Commission asks, they're already in the design guidelines because the design guidelines are good. And going through Design Commission just means that you can ask for changes, right? If you just follow the guidelines, you can go through and just do what's asked, but you can have a little bit more leeway, like saying, we don't want to put greenery on the roof because I feel like it's too high for bees and hummingbirds to fly around. But if we put it down at the ground level, people can use it. And I think the pollinators will survive better out of the wind. So you can ask for those kinds of changes. So I think that the urban moves in there are what are already important to Design Commission and to PBOT. So we weren't thinking about it like that, but it really is a big move because there's a neighborhood coming, because there's a whole new district coming.
Yeah, it's cool to think about, the future residents there being witness to that evolution
Yeah.
and that future evolution. That's
A
pretty
kid could
cool.
move in now when they're 5 or whatever, and
Yeah.
by the time they go to college, they're going to see a lot of things come up.
Yeah. Let's see, 2 quick questions. What is a unit mix and who is the contractor?
Contractor was Colas. It was actually only the second time they ever had a tower crane. So that was cool
Wow.
because they hadn't been doing projects that were that tall vertically. And it was also because there was such a grade change, right? They needed something taller that could kind of span both sides. That was coolest. And then the unit mix, it's ones, twos, and threes. The 3 bedrooms already have a washer and dryer included. The ones and twos don't, but there's a laundry down on the ground floor. And I think that it's 50% twos, and I can't remember how many threes versus how many ones, but there's not as many threes. Mostly twos, though.
Okay, I had a question about, you mentioned that the collaboration with the artists came kind of on the later part of the design process. And
Yeah.
if you had your way and got to work with Robert and Cleo from the very beginning, how would you have incorporated their artistic point of view into the design process?
That's a really good question. I think it's hard when you're working with artists to imagine because it's really like you're not involving them early enough that their ideas actually change the form of the building. But if I were working with Base, who are an architecture firm, and Cleo's in that, and so thinking more about architecture, because they came in on the interiors, right? But they weren't in the architecture so much. They were part of the sort of advisory group, and so we would present design to them. So Cleo and Robert, the Albina Vision Trust board, and then folks who worked for Albina Vision Trust were all part of the design meetings. So they weren't in every design meeting, but we did meet with them and talk about everything in the building. And the adding the Afrofuturism came later, but had it come earlier, I think that they just would have been front loaded a lot to talk about specifically what are these big ideas that we could incorporate? How does that impact the massing of the building? How does it impact what kinds of spaces are in the building? And so that would have been really cool. But I think so good designers are trying to take all the cues they can and make a building specific to its place, right? But we still have a lot of rectangle buildings, and this building is not a rectangle, but I feel like it may have been even a wilder shape. We had some ideas about, the tops of the building, the parapet being sort of more like a crown. I think we would have gotten somewhere like that, right? I think we would have gotten the idea of the stencil and the stucco. I think we would have started on that earlier and not had this proprietary drive-it system so that we could have gotten the reglets in there, right? It would have been a huge cost add, but it would have been amazing. And now instead of it would have been, I think what I heard from the artist was they wanted more dramatic, they wanted more aggressive, they wanted shinier and bigger, right? And so the stenciling for them wasn't as great because they wanted more, right? But we did everything that we could to get something in that facade. And we were just far enough down the line that we really couldn't change what we had already started to do, right? We already had all of our folks in place and we were in construction.
Yeah.
And so we really couldn't go back and do that stuff. So had we started that before we were in construction, I think that immediately we would have gotten that reglet reveal with gold in it. And I think the building may have been a little bit more dramatic, maybe on the roof line, but it already has a great massing that's unusual and gives you interesting vantage points and also gives you interesting shaped spaces on the interior, which I really think is important because we do a lot of boring stuff in architecture because the budget forces us to, right? We can never do all the things that we want to do. But I think that Albina Vision Trust, and for anyone who works with them in the future, you will all find that they are very excited about doing things differently, about spending money in places that actually make a difference. And they want you to go big. And so, that was a pretty big challenge to think of that kind of late in the game, but also to be like, oh, you want Afrofuturist architecture? What even is that? And now we have to be the ones to decide what that is based on what we come up with, right? But I think this is like a really subtle version, right? But I know AVT wants less subtle in the future. So I think this is the spot where it begins. It's subtle, it's embossed, it's really beautiful. You can see it, but you can't see it from space. And I think as we go farther out in the community investment plan area, there's going to be some wild stuff happening. And I'm super excited about that.
That's exciting to think about.
For everyone here to be able to participate in that and do some really cool things,
Yeah. Yeah. Exciting to think that the kind of artist perspective would be incorporated from the beginning and see what happens with that creative process.
Yeah.
And so I think we just have a couple of minutes left and we have to be very prompt. So I think you kind of answered the last question in terms of what has it been like working with AVT as a developer and your experience with the board.
Yeah, very much like they are excited and they want more. The board is excited, but the board knows how to defer to the few team members who are kind of on the design team and meeting really regularly. Because that's really a lot about, I think, what AVT, what 1803, what these organizations are about is allowing other voices to be heard. And so they just want to hand over and say, do it, do the thing that you think is cool. And yes, show it to us, but we'll be excited to see something amazing. So they're great to work with. They're certainly not heavy-handed. They just want to know what's going on, ask some questions, and then leave the rest to the sort of core team at AVT to work with the team. So they've been really wonderful. And kind of their enthusiasm for the future is wonderful. And their desire to do things differently is wonderful. And they're kind of like, if we need to find the money for something, let's find the money,
That's awesome.
We can't change the facade at this point, but they found the money to do this stenciling, which was extensive, covers the whole facade and takes a lot of work. And it's like, oh, has anyone done stucco stencils before? I don't know of any examples, but they're willing to pay for that, that experimentation to get something. So they're amazing.
Hey, Chandra, excuse me for interrupting. Annie, it's David again. I got two things to say. One, I cycle past the building every morning, and when you go past it, you turn and you look at it, and you look at everything, the 95% of the other context around it, and realize great things are coming. Love to hear that all laid out. Obviously, the urban design component is very exciting to our membership today to hear about. Lots of folks came out to see just that. So that's really wonderful. Don't feel like you crammed it in. That was really came across in so many great ways. I think more people will be more excited. I have to go run another meeting, as a lot of people on this call have to do. So I just wanted to give you a second to close the meeting. Annie, I'm going to let you close it out. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back again in February with more good information. Chandra, thanks so much.
That's awesome.
Go ahead, and if you have a thought here before we go, please do.
No, just thanks so much. This was great to get to share these stories with you. If you have some specific questions you want answered, feel free to email me. My email's in the chat.
You might get some emails on that.
That's cool.
Thank you so much, Chandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you
too.
next time.
Bye.
Okay, see you next time.